I watched television last night, and Jay Leno was talking to the President of the United States. And it was a fascinating program. It was all scripted, obviously. The President doesn't speak unless it's all scripted. And then they spoke about the George Zimmerman trial. And I was really upset when it was over. And I don't come here with an opinion on the George Zimmerman trial, except for the fact that there never was a case. Doesn't mean he didn't do it. It doesn't mean that he purposely didn't do it. There never was a case. There were 2 witnesses. Now in Goetz, we had 15 witnesses. And everybody sitting on the train, in the car, watching him be surrounded by 4 people, watching him take out a gun and shoot all 4 of them. But I had witnesses. And that was a case that should have gone to trial. And so it did. And not because the outcome was wonderful. It should have gone to trial because there was an issue. There were witnesses who said what they saw, and the prosecution said we must proceed. In the Zimmerman case, the prosecution said there will be no prosecution. There will be no desire to put this man on the stage and try him because we just don't have a case. They admitted they didn't have a case. And then, somewhere about a month later, there was an outcry by the community, and lo and behold, a special prosecutor was appointed. It's awful. People should not be prosecuted because the community is upset. People should be prosecuted if there is enough proof to merit that. And I mean, I watched the trial. It was covered in Florida because Florida allows cameras in the courtrooms. And it was quite clear that the jury had no choice but to come back not guilty. And that doesn't mean they had to come back and say not guilty because one side was favored. That meant that there was no case. And it was awful. The criminal justice system was taken and just put on its head. It was just the wrong thing to do. You don't prosecute people in this country because there's a racist thought. You prosecute people because you think, or at least the prosecution thinks, they can prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. In this case, and I have taken no position because I wasn't a witness, I wasn't there, in this case there was not enough evidence to even prosecute. In this case, the judge should have thrown it out before it got to the jury. But it didn't happen that way. And what basically occurred was a pretty terrible thing. And I'm fearful of it. You know my name is Barry Slotnick. I represented Bernhard Goetz in 1984. It was a fine trial. It ended up wonderfully. We walked out with great victory. But it too pained me. Because Bernhard Goetz was arrested for shooting 4 people on a subway car. He was arrested for shooting them because he feared for his life. And as I said, there were 15 witnesses who watched these 4 kids surround him, who watched them grimace at him. He had been mugged before, he had been hurt before, and he wasn't going to let it happen again. And we may not like the idea of shooting someone and saying that that's a okay thing to do, but people in this state have a right to defend themselves if they reasonably believe that they are in jeopardy and in danger. And the jury found that he was, and that was the end of it. But the painful thing for me was before jury selection. No, it was more painful before we even got to the courtroom. Because I ran into a fellow named Val Sharpton. And he turned around and said to me, "We're making our name on this case." I looked at him and I said, "What are you talking about?" I took the case. I represented Bernie. There was no sense of racial issues until Sharpton showed up. And when he showed up, he rallied the troops. And he got people very angry. And that was okay, because you know what? There were 15 witnesses, and they saw that Bernie was put in a position whereby he shouldn't have fired, whereby he really was involved in racism. But that's something else. It just didn't happen, and it wasn't there, and the jury was allowed to prevail in their decision. Now, with George Zimmerman, if you look at it, you know, I'm far from a racist. I don't take racial positions. I got angry last night when the President of the United States one more time commented on the trial and said some strange things for the President of the United States. And, you know, I'm sure that he and Jay Leno had it totally scripted, and they knew exactly what was going on. And the President has spoken on several occasions about this horrible shooting, and it was a horrible shooting. A 17-year-old kid who was killed by someone who, as far as we can tell, believed he was in jeopardy. And someone who was going to protect himself. And someone who, under the laws of Florida, had a right to fire. The racial aspects of it are very unfortunate. They come from people who are not witnesses, who clearly didn't see what went on. And they come from people who are fanning the flames of discontent in this country. Yes, I am very upset that the President is taking a position with regard to this case. It's inappropriate. But, you know, this too shall pass. We had a case in our courts called O.J. Simpson. And that split the community so. It was just terrible. I watched, and now I was an old hand, and with O.J. Simpson, every media giant in the world came to me because I had tried the guest case, and they thought I was a genius with regard to this stuff. And I didn't speak. I didn't speak for the same reason I was asked to represent O.J. Simpson, and I said no. And I said no because I knew it was going to turn out to be a racial case. I said no because I represent lots of people who go before jurors, and I didn't want the jurors to have an opinion about who Barry Slotnick was. And so I had to stay out of that case and comment on it. But it too was awful. It was a case that was turned into a racial case in a reverse sort of way. And it was no fun. With regard to the Zimmerman case, as I said, I played golf the other day. I was in Hamptons, and it was so nice. And here I am. He always ordered you up so early. I'm not sure I understand it yet. But I played golf with someone who I really didn't know. We were just paired together. And he went on and on and on about, on the reverse side, about Trayvon Martin, that he was a hoodlum and he had done all sorts of bad things. And I said to him, I said, you sound like a racist. He said, aha, that's what people say. And I said, how terrible that is. So, George Zimmerman at 28, for all of you who are anti-George Zimmerman people, and I do understand that. I think it's short-sighted, respectfully. I think that it's not how this country works. We don't put people in a box because we want to send them to jail because we don't like their political views. That's far from what we do. It was interesting that the President was asked last night what he thought of Putin. And it was fascinating because he smiled and he said, well, you know, he is who he is, etc. cetera. And I said to myself, I guess Putin could talk about the president in the same way. I'm angry at the president, and it's quite clear. I think he should have better understanding, better control, and should not rise to the point where we have to be concerned about his opinions and whether they're formed as a result of race or some other thing. That's my thought on the case. I've given you something that I didn't give CNN and I didn't give Fox, because when there's a racial trial, they will call me. I try not to comment. One, I may influence the jury, and I don't want to do that. That's inappropriate. And two, I want other jurors, when they see me representing someone, not to feel that I come burdened by a political agenda. I really don't. But I do know one thing. In this country, we have a thing called liberty. And it's very important. It makes us very different. It makes us very different than the Putins of this world and lots of other people. So we are who we are. I'd like to hear some of your questions about the trial. I'm obviously very disturbed by it. The verdict was the proper one, but it's spawned anger. And that's not what trials are supposed to be.
I just have a short comment. This young man went out one night to buy some Skittles and some sodas, the way I understand it, and he was killed. If there was no evidence, no witnesses, no one gets blamed for someone getting murdered? You know, how can you satisfy that?
Murder is a legal phrase. Here's the problem. Murder is a legal phrase. People shoot people.
It's also a reality. The kid is dead. Someone
He's dead.
killed him.
Doesn't mean that he was murdered. You know, as I said, I was fortunate in Goetz. I had 15 witnesses, half of whom testified against him, but that was fine. Jury sorted it out. Murder is a bad term, because murder means that there's a premeditation. Murder means that Zimmerman fired inappropriately, that he shot and killed him based upon the fact that there was no right to do that. The jury found that Zimmerman did shoot, but they also found that he was appropriate in what he did, that he was defending himself. So please understand, there was a 17-year-old kid who was dead, and for that we're all in pain. But he may have caused it on himself.
It just feels very unsatisfying that, you know, this young man had a life ahead of him, even though he was troubled, and now he's gone due to...
Terrible. It's absolutely, utterly terrible. But because I sort of, let's say, rag on the prosecution, that they shouldn't have done this was just wrong. Yes, there was a dead 17-year-old, and that's tragic. And by the way, one other reason for not prosecuting him. Murder cases carry no penalties with regard to time, so that there is no statute of limitations with regard to murder. There is now. Because assuming that Zimmerman did something that ultimately would be discovered by the prosecution that would put him as a shooter, a killer, assuming that he did that, that's gone now, because he's been acquitted. He can't be retried for murder. He can't be retried for manslaughter. It was just bad thinking. Yes, it was people who did believe there was a dead body, there was a dead person, and someone should go to jail.
Well, I think the emotions, emotions always carry this, that everyone wants to point a finger and hang someone, blame someone, and it seemed like Zimmerman was the one, because
If it was his
he
gun,
defended himself.
Clear it was his gun, and he defended himself. Do we put him in jail because there's a dead body?
I don't know the answer.
Yes.
So, unless we, I know I did not, but unless we actually watched the trial as you did, it's hard to really pass judgment on the jurisprudence of that process. So my question is, and you've posited that this should not have gone to trial because there wasn't enough evidence, but that it was a sort of social focus on the impetus to put this on trial. I'm just concerned that, and I don't have an opinion on guilt or no, but I'm just concerned that
The jury did.
But yes, so that's fine. But I'm concerned that what if there was not a trial? What might have happened throughout the country and the community, and that could have taken on some racial overtones. So isn't this a way to kind of ameliorate the
That's not what I'm
tension?
saying. Here's the problem. Someone killed Trayvon Martin. Someone went to trial and was acquitted. Anger. Outrage and anger. That's not what our criminal justice system is about. Our criminal justice system is about fairness and not putting people in jail because there's a dead body. Can a prosecutor walk into this room and say, you, and you insider trading? Sure. You come to my practice, they do that a lot.
So I guess my question is, what would have, but what would have happened if it didn't go to trial? What?
Outrage, there would have been anger, there would have been demonstrations. So it's better that we take someone who the prosecution doesn't have enough evidence, put them on trial, and then there's the same anger. Because the people who are angry, they're not satisfied. And they say this is a racial case. I see, as I mentioned, Al Sharpton. I see Al Sharpton every once in a while at the Regency Hotel when it was open for breakfast. I don't ask him who's paying for his breakfast.
Yes, no answer.
But I see him for breakfast, and he waves to me, and I wave to him. And he always says, Barry and I, we made each other important. And I look at him and I say, hi, Al. And I'm very disturbed by it. But I've tried cases that were turned into racial cases. I've never lost one. And that doesn't mean that the prosecution was wrong. With Bernhard Goetz, I told you, they should have tried that case, and they did. Fortunately, the verdict was the right one. I've tried Crown Heights cases where black-white confrontations are very strong. I had a case where 2 Hasidic rabbis were accused of assaulting a black man in Crown Heights. Now, picking a jury for that kind of case is no fun because it's a Brooklyn jury. And lots of people say, Crown Heights, okay, racial discrimination. I tried the case, took 2 weeks, jury went out, the end of 3 days, we have a verdict. I get a note, judge says, here, Mr. Slotnick, the note says, cancel that, we don't have a verdict. A day later, they had a verdict and they acquitted my clients. And the judge said, I'd like to know what that note was about. You had a verdict and then this woman raised her hand, she said, I live in Crown, an African-American woman, I live in Crown Heights. I did not know, I believed that they were not guilty, but I didn't know how to deliver that so I could go back to my community. She found me good. Yes.
As an attorney, I agree with you based on what I know about the case. I think the jury came in with the right verdict. Obviously, you can't say that unless you heard 10,000 pages of testimony, but heard enough to believe that this was not an unusual verdict based on what they were charged with. I'd like to ask you this. Personally, I've been involved with many racially charged cases over the last 25 or 30 years, on both sides, you might say. But I'd like to ask you about the question you said about, comments you made about what the president said. Because When I heard Obama's first remarks, not the ones I happened to have seen last night's show, but when he made them 2 weeks ago, he said in his comments, perhaps as a brief aside, that the jury did its job. He didn't say the jury was incorrect. I thought, as I listened to him the first time, that he was addressing himself to something else, and something that may be appropriate for a president to address himself to. When there's a large issue in a country that a lot of people feel, and I'm not saying I'm mob mentality, but when a lot of people feel there was a wrong, could it not be the role of the president to sometimes explain why people feel that way, even if they're wrong in terms of the verdict? He didn't say the jury should have gone the other way. I think what he was trying to do, the way I heard him, was to explain why so many blacks, the experience that many blacks have had, that most of us around the table have not had, of being looked at with suspicion, of being followed in the supermarket, experiences of that kind. Now, none of that means that Zimmerman should have been convicted, that's obvious. But if you have 10, 20, 30 million people who have that reaction, I would say that maybe it's a sign of presidential leadership to try to understand and explain to others why it is that some people feel that way, even though the verdict should not be different. And if it had been the other way around, I would say the same thing. So on the verdict itself, from everything that I heard, I didn't find it exceptional at all. But in terms of what a president does as a leader, not in commenting on the correctness of the verdict, but commenting on the sense of hurt that a big portion of the American population feels, and why that may be that way, wouldn't that be actually an appropriate thing for a president to do?
My feeling is that you're very good at what you argue, so you're a good lawyer. My feeling is that this president should not have taken that position because he just put into consternation the possibility that more people will get angry and say, even the president says. I do think that it's the president's position, or it should have been his position, to indicate that there was a jury, that this is the way the system works. Yet, he spoke about how if he had a son, that gets people angry. Because I do know that people who have children who they feel could have been discriminated against because they're African American have a right to be angry. But that anger should not overtake the system. And the system is, we don't put people in jail because we don't like them. And that's really the way I see it. And I see exacerbation of the issue. If it was my son, oh, it's so painful. Or many years ago, I could have been Trayvon Martin and killed. It's so painful. Yeah, are blacks discriminated against in this country? Sure. Certain parts of the country, come with me, I'll show you where Jews are like. No, it's part of the system.
Would you have felt better if he had said a couple of extra sentences along that direction, saying, look, the judicial system cannot right all wrongs, all perceived wrongs. We have a set of rules here that perhaps the average person doesn't understand, but it protects all of us against mob rules. So there are a lot of wrongs that emerge from trials, how we publicize trials, sense of wrongs, which the judicial system can't correct, but which we ought to understand why people feel that way. That's a very different issue than saying the jury should have put Zimmerman in jail. A good president, a good spokesman, whether it's Obama or somebody else, I think can make the distinction between the two.
Well, Obama certainly is one of the best speakers we've ever had as president. He's super when it comes to putting forth his positions. I just think it was unfortunate because he did rile up people, and they got angry. And
This
that's
is
not a good thing.
Sorry, this is one of the rare times that he's really revealed himself, and it's either a commentary on being president that you can never speak from your heart; you have to speak with some universal voice. But he was really expressing his own feelings, and I commend him for that.
Clearly, I don't think the President of the United States at all times to express his own feelings.
I don't think he
I
does
think
all
he's
the
got a
time.
greater job to do, which is to keep us all in good stead.
Hey, Barry?
Yeah.
I agree with you based on what I've heard, that it didn't seem like there was a murder case at all, but why didn't the prosecutors charge him with aggravated assault? I mean, you see other trials in the Cleveland case, they threw in, 600 charges. Why not charge him with, failure to stay on the sidewalk in the park? But aggravated assault seemed like a much better potential case, which is 5
They
years
could
in
have done
Florida.
that. Yeah, they could have done that. I think they wanted murder. I think they went in there frothing because they assumed that it was a dead 17-year-old and Zimmerman was going to pay for it.
But wouldn't they have done, isn't it normal to do multiple charges all the way down the line just to protect yourself?
Yes, but sometimes that leads the jury into lesser included, and they wanted death. Yes.
Sir, do you believe, well, I'd like to know your reaction when the judge allowed the jury to consider manslaughter charges. What was your personal opinion on that, and do you think it fueled some of the anger on the other side of the table?
Yeah, the answer is yes, yes, and yes. Judge had the right, I do believe, to allow a lesser included of manslaughter. At the time the prosecution asked for it, they were in despair. They knew it was over.
Mm.
So they were looking for disorderly conduct. Any kind of conviction. Why they didn't go your route, I don't know. But they took something associated with a death. And that's why they did it.
So your
I just
position
think
was they were losing
not-
the game, they were losing the game at that time, and this was a
Mhm.
backpedaling?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Yes.
Bernhard Goetz was 30 years ago, give or take a year. If that case was tried again today with our social environment, our media environment, do you think there might have been a different outcome?
I would try it differently. When Bernhard Goetz was tried, there were two very diverse groups. There are two groups now, unfortunately. They continue on. But New York City, is anybody here old enough other than me to remember New York City in 1984? I mean, we lived on the Upper West Side. Not a place to go. I mean, we moved out of Manhattan because I came home one night and I saw this woman getting taken out in a gurney. Someone had broken into her apartment and tried to steal everything she had and hurt her. And so I went to my wife and I said, find a house. We're getting out of here. It was terrible. So I had that going for me. And I was able to play off that. If I were to try Bernhard Goetz, if it occurred today, I would have to try a different case. And I'd have to try a case where I would have a greater use of the witnesses who saw what happened.
And what do you think about the fact the Justice Department may consider charges or is considering charges here? Whatever happened to the concept of double jeopardy?
I don't believe that even this Justice Department will come forward with anything that's mandatory. I think what will happen is there will be a civil action. I know there is a civil action. And we'll see what that happens. That's what it should have been in the first place. If there was, and people say, well, you have to come to a conclusion. Yes, sue them. There's a lesser burden. It's not a criminal trial. And let's see what happens. So we will see what happens. The civil case against Bernhard Goetz, I remind you all, if you don't remember, I didn't try that case. The jury came back with a $17 trillion verdict. So those angry people, although it was not a well-tried case, but those angry people got to vent their anger. And so they will sue, they are suing Zimmerman now, and we'll see what happens. Yes?
Barry, we're about 45 minutes into your discussion, and I know that stand your ground wasn't necessarily the basis of the Zimmerman defense, but what's your view on stand your ground? And do you think that it sets forth an environment for more of these kind of trials and confrontations?
I think it's an appropriate charge. I think that stand your ground is something that comes together with the ultimate of self-defense. Now, if you think you're in trouble, then it better be a reasonable thought. And if there's a reasonable thought, now if you walk into your living room and you see someone opening up a window, walking into your living room, and you have a gun, you have a right to shoot him.
But that's the common law stand your ground that existed for years. The new stand your ground that was passed with a lot of the lobbies is the legislative one, which says you have no obligation to retreat even if you can retreat. I mean, how do you, are you in favor of the new laws? In your house, you always had the right to stand your ground.
That's correct. In your house, you can shoot to kill.
Right.
Assuming that it's someone who doesn't belong there.
Your mother-in-law.
I do believe that people commit crimes as stated by the legislature. I also do believe that the fact is when we're in a situation where you reasonably have the right to believe that you're in trouble, I think you have the right to shoot. I don't like the legislative actions. I think it's wrong, but it's a reaction. It's a bad reaction. Thanks.
I'm a little, keep turning over in my mind, trying to compare Bernhard Goetz and Trayvon Martin. Obviously, everyone's thinking about it. And there are a lot of similar racial issues, I think, both legally and the larger community environment. But in my mind, I see Bernhard Goetz was surrounded by 4 kids. He was minding his own business. And with Trayvon Martin,
That was my position at the trial.
yeah. So in terms of genealogy, the founding father is Bernhard Goetz sitting there minding his own business. In Trayvon Martin, the genealogy is the founding father is George Zimmerman, playing at being a cop and doing everything wrong, and then provoking a series of incidents which became a legal case. So you've been coming on a legal case. I'm not a lawyer, but
How lucky can you be?
I don't know. Tell me. But the case is also the social case, and I feel like it's been sort of obscured by your legal brief a little bit. We all looking for some kind of emotional resolution. It's something everyone thinks was horrible. So George Zimmerman is kind of almost a pawn in that whole thing, but somebody's guilty. Not somebody, some entity is guilty that set up this genealogy of actions.
Guilty of what?
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. It's outside of the immediate purview of the legal situation, which we all, I'm sure, have some curiosity about, is how to settle in our own minds.
Let me tell you something about the Goetz case. 2 witnesses got up and they said, we watched him, 4 people came to him, he took out his gun and he shot them. After he shot them, he walked over to someone who was sitting on the car, one of the kids, and he said, you don't look bad, here's another, and he went bang. Now, if the jury believed that one, that is the creation of going to jail for 30 years.
Is it a fifth crime?
No, there were 4. There were, unfortunately, corroborated by Bernie's confession. There were 4. There were 5 shots. 1 missed and hit the railroad car door, or the subway car door. But Bernhard Goetz, when he surrendered, did a videotape deposition with the prosecution. He didn't have counsel at that point. I was busy in the same morning. And so he said, I fired 4 shots, and I saw there was 1 sitting, and he looked okay, and I walked over and I said, you don't look bad, here's another. And I went bang. Maybe that's what he believed. I convinced the jury that don't believe that. There were 2 other people who also read the Daily News and said, I saw him walk over, there was someone seated, he wasn't shot, he took his gun out, and he went, you don't look bad, here's another, bang. So there is this whole sociological issue of what happens at that point. Fortunately, the jury believed that Bernie saying you don't look bad, here's another, to a camera, never really happened. And it's a 2-hour dissertation as to how you prove that to a jury. But they walked out feeling very comfortable. Yes.
In terms of time, time lost for Goetz, and looking at Zimmerman, how many years did Goetz have to spend fighting the criminal, dealing with Goetz, the criminal charge and then the civil charge? And so, in looking at Zimmerman, I forget, maybe it was a year or something.
No, it was less than a year.
Oh, so how long do you think he's going to fight on the civil side, and assuming he's acquitted at that? How many years of Goetz's life and how many years of Zimmerman's life will be lost, so to speak, to this?
Well, with regard to Goetz, it took a long time. One, I was busy trying other cases. The New York Times had an editorial saying the community wants to know. Goetz must go to trial. If Slotnick's too busy to try it, tell Goetz to get another lawyer. And I was then busy. Mario Biaggi, you may or may not remember him. I tried his case. He was a congressman. I tried his case. Then thereafter, it was a guy by the name of Gotti. I tried the first Gotti case. Then there were two other cases. And the judge said, no, Mr. Slotnick is busy. He's on trial. This case will have its completion. And then the New York Times editorial, and we finally started to select a jury. So it took 3 years.
On the criminal side?
Yes.
And how about on the civil side?
The civil case waited until the criminal case was over, and that took another 2 years. So it was a lengthy proceeding. Zimmerman will find himself in the courtroom for the next 5 years.
On the civil side?
Yeah, and you know what? Maybe he deserves it, maybe he doesn't. I think the civil case is a real case, and we'll see what the jury does with that. Yes,
If you were the prosecutor in Zimmerman, other than not bringing the case, assuming you were assigned to prosecute it and the state attorney did it, what would you have done better? And some of the commentaries have discussed the jury selection, the peremptory charges, there's lots and lots.
it's easy to do that
After the fact, it's very, but from what you have seen, what things do you think they could have done, or you would have done, that would have made it a more effective presentation?
I think the face-to-face with the jury could have been done better by the prosecution. I think they were a little bit aloof, and you know, I did watch it on TV because I was curious, and just in case some reporter caught me off guard, I wanted to make sure that I knew what it was about. I think they were a little aloof, and they could have tried to do a one-on-one with the jury in a better way.
Barry, one point you haven't discussed yet. How do you think it changed the dynamic? The fact that Zimmerman reported it to the police, was told by the police to stand down, go home, we're going to take care of this. He chose to disregard them and armed, put himself in a situation where he was trailing Trayvon Martin. We're in a real-world situation. Things reversed. Trayvon Martin had the right to say, and he apparently did say, hey, what are you doing? Why are you following me? We don't know what happened after that, definitely, you know, who tumbled who. But the fact that Martin put himself in that situation for mayhem or violence, or in this case death, we're not saying murder, but if he'd listened to the police and not done that, with a gun in his pocket, none of this would have happened. Does that change the dynamic in your view?
Not really. I mean, yes, you're right. None of this might not have happened. Probably wouldn't have happened. But the fact of the matter is that my issue is, and I'm not trying to find who did or didn't do what, because I just can't do that. I wasn't there. My issue is the prosecution should have waited.
Can I ask you a different question? Different about Trayvon Martin, but I want your opinion about this. O.J. Simpson's in jail now for a different type of crime that maybe a first-time offender, which he wasn't because he was never convicted, would not be in jail for 30, 40, or 50 years. Do you have any opinion about, Nevada maybe convicting someone for the crime they didn't get convicted of the first time, sort of trying to do something in the public law field, feeling they were evening a score or something?
Well, you're looking at a lawyer who does believe that every criminal case should be won because the prosecution's got to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. My God, what a burden! Beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, I look at every juror, and I always say, beyond, wow, how do they do that? They can't do that. They haven't done that. And so it's not relevant to Nevada. I've tried a lot of cases in Nevada. I represent Steve Wynn. So, you know, I have a second home going to Las Vegas. And I've tried cases. They're reasonable people. So I think that you have concern, and I think it's right. But my sense is that Nevada's a good place. My sense is that this case that we're talking about, the Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin case, becomes what Al Sharpton says, you know, our case. And that's what it's all about. And that's terrible. Yes?
So I'm not an attorney, so it's hard for me to get into your skin and get a sense of how you feel about this. But I'm just curious how you deal with your own sort of emotional commitment or lack thereof when you're thinking about, is this person I'm defending guilty or not?
We have a policy in my office, and we have a pretty large office. We have 800 lawyers and, you know, 12 offices throughout the country. We have a policy that we don't take child molestation cases unless we believe that they're absolutely, totally false. I will take any other case. I've tried death penalty cases. Fortunately, no one's been convicted. But I take that because what's more important than to make sure the system works? I tried a case in Schenectady. I took a book with me called When 6 Million Died. Every night I would stay in the motel, which was across the street from the courthouse, and I'd do a chapter. It would make me angry. It was Hitler, it was Germany, it was a horror show. I can't do it. So if I represent someone who I know, and I know, because I asked them, did you do it, didn't you do it, you got to tell me, because defenses change. Well, yeah, I did kill him. Okay, now we have to figure out, I don't mean to just be mild about it. Now we have to figure out, how do we put the prosecution in a position where they haven't proven the case beyond a reasonable doubt. You may think less of them, but that's the way it is. And I am liberty's the last champion.
Yep, thank you everybody very much for coming. We used to have this on a monthly basis for years, and we stopped for a while, and Barry's our first one back, and we're going to start doing this again on a monthly basis. We'll send you notes who the next speaker is for September. Thank you all for taking time to come out in the morning. Just remember, if you think of public relations, we have a wonderful client base, we have a wonderful relationship base and friends, and thank you again. Enjoy your day.
Can you do this a little later than 8 in the morning?